Hi everyone, and welcome to Breaking the Spell. So today we actually have a guest. So he's actually a representative from the Humanist Society Singapore. That's Tan Ding Jie, sitting right here with us today.
Hi.
So thanks Ding Jie for coming in and joining us for a conversation.
Thanks for having me.
So yeah, no worries. So I'm just going to just first read an introduction of his bio first. So Ding Jie basically serves as the Vice President of the Humanist Society Singapore, where he seeks to provide a voice for the non-religious minority of Singapore. As part of Peace, and that is a youth-led advocacy group committed to inter-ethnic and inter-belief engagement so as to foster social harmony. So that's one organization. And A Good Space, which is a cooperative to promote change-making. Ding Jie advocates civil discourse, social harmony, and doing good for goodness sake. Outside of your volunteering for Humanist Society, you work at A-Star. So he works at A-Star where he works on cultivated meats. He also founded Starter Culture, which is a food biotech startup investigating precision fermentation and molecular farming. Okay, this is really science. But anyway, cool. So thanks, Ding Jie, like I said, for coming on to the show. And I just wanted to explain a little bit about why we wanted to have you on. So, the name of our show is Breaking the Spell. And, Unsu came up, me and him, we came up with this concept to, talk about conventional ideas out there, try to debunk conventional ideas. And we were thinking of like philosophy issues, social issues. But Unsu actually has a friend who pointed out that Breaking the Spell is also the title of Daniel Dennett, a philosopher who is also an atheist, right? He's one of the four horsemen, right, yes. of the militant atheist group. And yeah, in that sense, we haven't actually had a show, an episode where we talk about humanism, secularism, and I thought what better than to have someone who is actually involved in an organization that probably would have heard many voices from, at least in this case, Singaporeans, about maybe their issues being non-religious and whether it is a tension point for them, right? So anyway, you are having a difficult job here because you're wearing two hats, right? You represent your organization as well, but we don't know you, so we're also here to know more about you as a person. So I'm going to ask you the first question, which is, when was the first time you realized that the world is not the way it should be? And feel free to answer that in any way, right? Whether it's a maybe socio-political thing or a religion thing or humanist thing.
Yeah. Again, thanks for having me here today. I'm happy to share what I can. It was quite interesting. I think I have been quite privileged to grow up in Singapore. Singapore is relatively, I would say, sheltered, right? But I think the first time was when I started to see that, hey, maybe things could be a bit different. It was going through NS and then meeting people that are outside of your usual social circles. And when I did my degree in the UK after that, that was again when I saw that Singapore is or rather the world is much bigger than just Singapore, and there are many different ways of doing things, of problem solving, finding solutions than what we typically see in Singapore. And it was also in the UK where I started volunteering for the student Atheist Society, and that was when I saw the power and impact of community, of bringing students or bringing peers who have the same vision or the same values to come together and to try to do good for goodness sake. And of course, there was when I graduated and I came back to Singapore, that was when I started to volunteer for the Humanist Society in Singapore. So I guess that would be sort of when I started to see that, hey, maybe things could be a bit different. Yeah.
So I have two questions, right? So first, talk a bit more about what your experience in the UK, right, and being part of this, as you said, Atheist Society. Is that right? To put it that way, right? So what exactly was the experience there that spoke to you, right? Like, was it finding like-minded people, finding that you needed a community of people to share, some kind of secular beliefs, and you feel that kind of solidarity is important? So that's like an example. And then the other thing I also want to ask is that, okay, so Humanist Society, from what I understand, has been around for quite a while, right? I think 10 or so years.
Yeah, but right. I think this is our 12th year. Right.
So talk a bit also about like your journey in Humanist Society, so we have a sense of like your growth as well. Yeah.
Yeah. In the UK, so when I first found out about that student society, I thought, maybe all they got together to do was to just, rant about life and the lack of religion. But what I saw was actually something that was quite interesting, and so they would, or we would meet at the pub every Tuesday for what we call pub socials. And of course, being in the UK at the student pub, it was like £1 per pint, which was quite quite affordable. And people would just like talk about life, talk about current affairs. There was no hard agenda, no timekeeper. You just sit there, chill for as long as you wanted to chill. You could drink in silence, read a book if you wanted to do that, or just join in the group conversation. But that was when I first saw, hey, that there could be a community for people who probably wouldn't otherwise have a very organized community, right? So, if you were in a Christian society, you would probably meet at your church. If you were in a Muslim society, you probably meet at your mosque. And different faith groups have their own places of worship. But if you weren't religious, perhaps the pub was that place of worship. And I saw that people maybe didn't need so much of like worship, but having community helps. And I saw how bringing people together help people in need to maybe talk out some of the issues. They help to pool resources to fund certain community projects. And I thought that was a good initiative. And beyond that, we also organize, we had talks and lectures, not so much about why atheism is right or why religion is wrong. Not so much about that, but more of we had one talk that was quite memorable to me, and that was about the origin of laughter and humor. Right, so people were theorizing, how laughing came to be. We know that it's not a uniquely human response. We see some early proto laughs or proto humor in primates.
Yep.
And that sort of clues us in onto what is the human condition and what is being human in the absence of faith, and what it could mean. So that was something that I quite enjoyed, and I really wanted to sort of bring to Singapore. Back then, of course, I didn't know about the Humanist Society Singapore, but that's something that I thought that that could really be quite exciting and quite fun for atheists in Singapore. Yeah.
Right. And then my second question was like, describe a little bit, your journey. So you joined, say what year? How long have you been in it, and how are you now the vice president?
So I came back to Singapore in 2016, and I think I joined, when I came back, I immediately just Googled Humanist Society Singapore.
Right, so you were very compelled to find.
And I was quite sure that, hey, if there wasn't already a Humanist Society, I would try and start one. I was lucky enough that there was already an established community, and I just joined the Exco the following AGM, which was in 2017, and I just joined as a regular committee member. And I was just quite interested to learn more about how the society works, and how I could sort of be of help to build this community and this network. Yeah.
Now, I'm curious if you know what the history is behind why a society of atheists would be called the Humanist Society rather than the Atheist Society. Is there a specific resonance of the word humanism?
It's a few folds. One is branding. It's when people think of atheism, they think of people who don't believe or lack of a belief in gods, right? To a lot of people, that is sort of they're keen of forming an anti, not so much satanic, but rather like an anti-football club.
Right.
Right. Like it's fine if you, or it's perceived to be quite normal to join a football club if you support a particular club, right? But you don't join a club if you don't watch football. There's no club for non-football watchers. And people sort of see atheism as that. So using the term humanism, I think sort of presents an umbrella that people can perhaps resonate with. And speaking about resonating, I think humanism is interesting because it also encapsulates certain values that the term atheism does not. So
can you expound on that?
Yeah. So when I was in the UK, our student society, the full name of the society was the Atheist, Secularist, and Humanist Society. Quite a bit of a mouthful. Yeah. But I've had one member back then explain it to me, I think quite well, and I'll borrow his words. Atheist, Secularist, Humanist Society. These are three words that sort of mean three different things. To him, he saw atheism as a sort of metaphysical statement, right? It's a statement of reality, is that there are no supernatural beings or deities in the world. So it's atheism. It doesn't tell people how you vote. It doesn't tell people whether you brush your teeth in the morning and stuff like that. It doesn't tell people that what you do on a day-to-day basis, right? It's just that, right? You can be you can replace atheism with any other faith, and that still would that sentence would still make sense. Then we look at the second word, which is secularist. Secularism would be a political term, right? So that is essentially the separation of what we call church and state, right? Religion and politics. Again, doesn't tell you where you lean on the socio-economical spectrum, right? It just says that when you devise politics that affect many, you shouldn't be thinking about faith or religion. And then humanism or humanists would be sort of that value statement, and that tells people how you see other humans, and for humanists we see humans as good regardless of faith, and we see humans have the capacity to do good with or without faith. So you don't need someone telling you, or rather you don't need a higher power telling you to be good, to do good.
Yeah, I know. So I don't know if you're familiar with the French writer Michel de Montaigne, but like when I think of humanism, he's the first name that comes up, and like I think he's known for maybe being one of the first people that actually started writing a book and said, I'm going to write about myself. Like because other people, they would write about God or write about other like big topics, and he felt that a human being was a worthy subject for a whole book, and then his book of essays was just filled with all kinds of just interesting things about himself. It was very confessional. He talked about his good and his bad traits, and there was a lot of humor in it. So I mean, I feel his book kind of encapsulates what humanism is about for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think if you were to take a deep dive into it, there's perhaps a very long history of humanism in human civilization. Perhaps we just haven't branded it as humanism. Essentially, if you see any philosophy that challenges people to do good or be better without relying on supernatural deities or relying on authority, that could be essentially humanism. But there's a long history, and I think there's also a long history in Asia. So it's not just some people see it as a very Western sort of philosophy or idea, but no, I don't think that it is. But I think also what resonates with me in particular is that humanism is also quite personal. Right, we can go into the philosophy of it, but at the same time, humanism is about how you behave as an individual, right? You don't need to have read all the texts, the whole recommended reading list to be a humanist. You just have to be a decent person, I think. Yeah.
So actually, can you get into the Asia part? Because I think that's interesting for maybe our viewers. Because you're right. I mean, my conception of humanism, secularism, everything else you just mentioned, those particular schools, I have been unfortunately it's the only recourse it's the one library that I go to, which is generally the Western canon, right? But you're right, there should be some resources also from the Asian perspective as well. So can you talk a bit about that? Like, are there thinkers or leaders or movers, in the Asian contexts that are also classified as humanists, or?
I'm not an expert or practitioner, but I've heard people tell me that, hey, would you consider a secular slant of Buddhism to be a humanist philosophy? Right? Because in quite a bit of Buddhism, there's not so much about worship of a deity. There's not so much about believing that a supernatural being will alter the universe for you, but a lot of it is about self-introspection. It's about how you care for other humans, how you care for the environment, other living things, and that in itself sounds quite humanist to me. There are other faiths that if you just sort of like remove or look over the supernatural parts of it, would also be quite humanist. And that's also quite something that's quite there's also an interesting development in humanism today, is that while usually when we mention humanists, we usually refer to secular humanists, right? But there are also groups, humanist groups, that see themselves as religious humanists. So they may have follow the same values as secular humanists, just that for whatever reason, maybe for family reasons, for tradition, for heritage, they may still believe in the existence of a higher power. Yeah.
So maybe just so that we stay on track, right, to understand what a humanist is, do you have a definition for us? So and also further to that, right, because you do talk about how a humanist does want to do good for humanity, right? What are the kind of like value systems you're drawing from? Yeah.
So that's quite interesting. It's a bit tricky to sort of to define humanism, but I will tell you how I see humanism. Humanism is interesting because we want to deliberately avoid dogma, right? So you don't want anyone, and let alone like some nobody like me, to tell you what humanism is, or whether you are humanist or not, right? It is of humanist philosophy that you should go on this discovery yourself, on this journey yourself, and see if you are a humanist. And it's interesting because the meter sort of changes depending on who's investigating it, right? In general, I think a humanist is someone, or rather a secular humanist is someone who, again, believes in the capacity of fellow human beings to do good, who believes that humans can write and craft moral laws that we can then all follow, so we don't need to rely on divine intervention to come up with commandments that we must obey. And I think, and finally, the defining characteristic of a secular humanist is that you can do all this and don't believe in a god or multiple gods. Right? A religious humanist would simply substitute that last line. And to me, that is essentially what a humanist is. So if you are someone of a different faith, a Christian and Muslim, and you also believe that your fellow humans, whether they are Christians or Muslims or non-religious, can do good, can be good, and they can do good without expecting divine reward, then yeah, you do share humanist values. And I don't think that anyone needs to be anyone needs to tick all the boxes to call yourself a humanist. I think if you share the same values, you can call yourself a humanist. If you are trying to you're working towards certain values that that you're not quite there yet, I'm like, yeah, sure, call yourself a humanist. We're all works in progress anyway. So that's sort of how I see it.
Yep.
On an international level, there are organizations such as the Humanist International, which has published what we call the minimum statement of humanism, and that is three short lines about what a couple of organizations around the world have all agreed on what humanism, again, what humanism minimally is. Yeah, so my personal view of humanism is sort of adapted from that.
Yeah, I mean, several times now you've talked about one of the qualities of humanism is that you believe that humans are capable of doing good without any like divine power involved. For me, so the kind of follow-up question to that is there, within the humanist movement, is there any questioning about the placing humans at the pinnacle of, like nature,
natural order,
the natural order of things, right? Because I mean, we spend a lot of time on this show talking about, the problems in the world today, and a lot of times we trace it actually to the arrogance of humans.
Yes.
That, we
Yes.
think we are
Indeed.
entitled
Yeah.
to exploit nature and exploit the world. And so, I'm wondering is whether within humanism there are these currents too that are questioning that.
Not. I don't know many people who subscribe to that. Some people see humanism as a form of speciesism, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like nationalism, where you favor one nationality over another, or racism, where you discriminate, one race over another. Some people say, "Oh, humanism, are you discriminating other species?" That's not quite. That's not quite how I see humanism. Again, I think when we look at when we try to expand what doing good means, I personally think that doing good also means living the world and the environment a better place than when you first found it, and that means also learning to live within the ecosystem, learning to work with nature, whatever that means, and not to exploit it. There is certain push and pull factors we understand, and that's the reality of economic development. But that's something that as humanists we are quite keen on discussing and looking at ways or finding solutions where we can work, live, coexist with nature in a sustainable manner. Right.
Yeah, so you use the word speciesism, and that actually comes from Peter Singer, right? So Peter Singer is, in my opinion, actually one of those philosophical figures that I understand that the humanist community does kind of look up to, right? One of his key ideas is effective altruism, and if I'm not wrong, maybe your organization tries to practice a bit of that as well. So we could talk about that more. I was going to add on to what you said, Unsu, about how this concept of like looking at man as pinnacle, right, of the natural order. I mean, it's funny that you bring it up. Like, I do think that within some debates, right, within philosophy, they point to religion as being the, maybe in some sense a culprit, right, for propagating that kind of idea. But in some sense, humanism can also be guilty of that crime too if they're not careful, because one of the things that you didn't mention as a definition of humanism, but I do believe it's definitely a tenet, is that why humans can be good is because of reasoning, right? So we got a faculty that other animal species don't possess, and we need to maximize and make full good use of that, right? And I think that obviously that's a that's the way human beings have been able to be so successful, right, on this earth. But at the same time, if not kind of discuss, analyze, and exercise in a critical kind of way, reason can also be our downfall, depending on how we look at certain ways that we have abused it, right?
Yeah.
So just to go from there into something else, right? I'm not saying something else, but kind of related to this, right? This whole concept about relationships and all that. I'm curious to also ask you on a personal level, what is the reactions of the people around you, like your friends, your family? If you can share, maybe they're religious or they're not religious. How do they react when they say, when they learn that you are a humanist, right? Yeah, or if you're non-religious or whatever, right? Like what's, and I also want to get into the experiences of your members as well, because there's a reason why your organization exists.
So again, I was quite lucky. My parents, my family, they generally subscribe to your traditional Chinese religions. There's some form of ancestral prayer, worship, some some Chinese New Year prayers or during certain occasions or festivals, but they're not super strict about it, not super like conservative about it, and I sort of found myself an atheist when I was like primary 3 or primary 4.
Oh, that's young.
Yeah.
What made you so certain?
Because I went to a Catholic primary school and I saw that, for the first 3 years in the school, I was saying morning grace, singing the hymns and everything. But for a while, or rather after a while, it sort of just clicked within me that, hey, like this way of looking at the world is to my young self back then was mutually exclusive from how my parents were looking at religion and faith, and was also exclusive from how I was learning about the world through science, through biology, and that was when I figured that, hey, okay, like this model of reality that relies on divine intervention was probably not a very useful model to understanding the physical reality of the world. But yeah, I mean, my folks have always been quite alright with it, and I think perhaps it's an Asian parent stereotype. They don't like people rocking the boat so much, because the whole family would pray together during festive occasions and stuff like that. Why do you have to be the weird one who's like refusing to like join in, or having to declare that you don't subscribe to it, right? But that was sort of like the worst I got from them about it. Yeah, so I've been quite lucky that they sort of like appreciated how I say things, and I think when I was younger I didn't quite get it, but now that I worked in this, we'll talk about it later as well, the interfaith scene a bit longer, I start to appreciate that like me being a humanist or me being an atheist doesn't need me to tell people that what you're doing is wrong, or like what you're doing is fiction, right? And I think people find ways, their own unique ways of coping with
suffering of the world.
The suffering of the world. Yeah, right. We are almost getting out of that 2-year-long tunnel that's COVID, and we are potentially heading into a European war. So it is quite crazy, and people find different ways of dealing with reality, right? Some people find community, some people find family, and for some people that community is part of their religious community. So yeah, but I mean, I say I've been quite lucky because, and that's your second question, is that some of our members have not been so lucky. And these are members that come from varying faiths. Of course, the more conservative ones, in particular, and they find themselves having trouble coming out, so to speak, to their family, friends, or community. They risk being excommunicated. They risk being shut off from a lot of their familial ties and basically the whole social support system, right? And that's when as the Humanist Society, we try to provide what we call peer support. We try to provide listening ear. It's a bit tricky in Singapore because in areas of religion and family, the general government policy in Singapore is to listen to the family, right? So any outsider that is perceived to be interfering or intervening in these issues is usually quite sticky.
Yeah.
Right. So we don't go out to go and like convert people or deconvert anyone, but rather just to make sure that they have a listening ear that perhaps isn't from a faith background, that because maybe someone who is religious, they don't want to hear from someone who's religious, right? Because they probably know what they're going to say, and we just try to provide that listening ear, whether or not they eventually leave their faith or go back to their faith. That's not our primary concern. Our primary concern is to make sure that they feel heard and they feel supported in times of when their identity or their core may be shaking or wavering. Yeah.
You got anything to ask?
Sounds like so it might actually be problematic if you actually wanted to produce like a guidebook to how you come out as a humanist. You can't have anything official like that.
I think when it is quite tricky, because from what we see, that there is no one size fit all guidebook. Everyone's situation is just a bit different. Some people may find comfortable coming out to friends than family. Some people may find it more comfortable to come out to strangers, because strangers don't care about you. Some just want to shout it out into the void of the world. So it is quite tricky, and also it is particularly tricky because of the scene in the landscape in Singapore.
Yeah, I want to ask a bit more about the kind of challenges that they face, because you're speaking for them, and obviously we're not going to have any identifying information here. But give us an example, right? Okay, why would someone be compelled, right, to want to feel like, I don't believe in this faith of my my family's faith anymore, and I just want to come out openly, right? I mean, I can imagine, for say, just to use an analogy, like someone who's gay. I mean, there's a very strong compelling reason, right? Because that person is always going to be presumed to be heteronormal, and it's a good, and coming out of the closet really helps to dissolve off that kind of conflict and contradictions, right, that person would face. But for someone who's a secularist or atheist, whatever, right, they could choose to just lead their life being quiet and just, maybe partake in religious activities, but with no sincere belief in, the divine or any of the, rituals, right? You could just follow along and just not, stir the pot, basically. So, can you just give us an idea, for your, some of these people, why is it so compelling, right? It's so important for them to come out.
I think it's important for some people because it's simply part of their identity, right? And for them to have to make an excuse to hide a particular part of them for whatever reason may sound fake, and people want to be themselves. They want to be their true selves, and that's why it's important for people to come out. Some people feel that they love their friends, they love their family, and they don't feel that it's right to have to hide such an important secret that is from people that they love, and they also want to be accepted by their network, by their community, and that's why it's even more important for them to come out, and some of them are willing to bear the consequences of it, but some of the consequences can be quite severe. For some people, if you come out or you leave the faith, you may be written out of inheritance or wills. Some people may see it, it's just like a financial punishment, but it's the reality that it matters a bit more than that, right? It talks about how your family sees you, how your community sees you, and that's quite important as well.
So I think connected to this is, do you think that the reason why it's so stigmatizing, right? And we're talking about, by the way, secular Singapore. Singapore is supposed to be a secular state. So you would think that it shouldn't be an issue for someone to not be a non-faith believer. But do you think this has to do with maybe Singaporeans in general may have some negative stereotypes or misconceptions about whether it's the atheists or secularists or humanists? I don't know what kind of stereotypes, negative stereotypes there will be, but do you think it has something to do with that?
There are a lot of different factors involved. You mentioned secular Singapore, and it is quite interesting to sort of take a detour to dissect the term a bit. Secularism in Singapore, so earlier I mentioned that secularism in general refers to a separation of church and state, like religion and politics. Singapore's brand of secularism is a bit different. For either wisdom or not, in Singapore we don't quite see secularism as a separation of religion and politics, but politics treating all religions fairly. I mean, it is quite politically smart, because majority of Singaporeans, about 80% of Singaporeans, identify as religious, right? And speaking as a humanist, if someone's faith is again as important to them as my identity as an atheist, it makes sense for policies that I may craft to also consider that part of their identity. So it makes sense to consider faith and religious identity in politics, and not to discard them. So treating all faiths' identity as equally important makes sense. The tricky part comes when a lot of faith-based identities are also conservative leaning, and that usually dampens the more progressive movements or progressive policy making. Yeah, and that is probably where the real friction arises. So it's not so much about secularism, but more of the tendency for a lot of faiths or religions to lean conservative, and more progressive ideas about being able to move from faith to faith, or even leave faith altogether.
Yeah, I know. The more you talk about humanism, it really sounds like the way you see it, it's like a very tolerant crossroads of all the different faiths and beliefs. And I mean, I'm really starting to have this image that it's where all the different belief systems can come and play. It's like it's safe, and it's not you're not going to be persecuted for what you care about, what you believe. I'm wondering whether you, in your time with the Humanist Society, what sort of conflicts you have experienced within it, tensions or conflicts, and if there have been any, like how you go about resolving them.
I'm not trying to recall, trying to see if I can recall any specific examples.
While you're doing that, I just want to make a point, because you talk about conservative elements right within the majority religions in Singapore. So when we had Muhammad Imran Taib on, I mean, one of the things that we talked about with him was how does how does Islam, sorry, I should say, look at the issue of homosexuality, and he presented a very progressive point of view. Yeah, and so I'm not going to try to recapitulate his argument here. So please tune into the video. But the idea is that I do think, going along with what you were saying earlier, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily that religion or the way organized religion is practiced has to adopt a very conservative stance in social issues. I mean, it's definitely very possible to still lean progressive. Yeah, and it's just more of a question about what's happening in Singapore or happening around the world actually.
Yeah.
Right? Why do we actually see an uprise in conservative politics within religions? Yeah. Okay, so maybe now I hope you've thought enough about his question.
It's a lot of having conflicts. I use quotation marks. Within the Humanist Society, usually, and I think you alluded to it earlier as well, when you talk about effective altruism, right? Usually looks at the very scarce and limited resources we have, and how best to spend them. Most of us agree on what's good, agree on most of us also lean progressive, so we agree in general about the kind of causes or that we should act on, or the kind of policies that we should craft.
Sorry, can you just give a quick definition of effective altruism in case the viewer doesn't know what it is? Yeah, just a quick one.
I'm not an expert in this, but to me, effective altruism is a philosophy or I don't want to use the word doctrine, it sounds a bit rigid. Essentially, it's about how to best, again, it takes into account very real economic problems, right? And economics is really the study of scarce limited resources. If you only have $10, you know, how best are you going to use that $10 to effect positive change in the world, right? Do you spend $5 shipping, you know, bottled water overseas, or do you use that $10 locally, where you know you may perhaps be most confident that $10 is you know going to be governed well. So these are the questions that I think effective altruism thinks about and investigates, and that is really, again, how to best use limited resources to do good, and that's something that we try to follow in the Humanist Society as well. We want to make sure that we are, you know, good stewards of the resources that our members and you know the public has entrusted to us, and then we constantly have to ask ourselves, like, okay, what's the best way that we can use these resources, this space, this pool of funds. Yeah.
So that's one of the main conflicts that you guys have.
So is, you know, we may agree, or yes, we you know, this is the cause that we want to work towards, but how best to do it, and how best to do it, you know, do we do it now, do we do it later, what's the best approach to it, you know, do we spend on marketing, or do we spend on execution, right? So these are the sort of like tussles that we have. Some of us are also more private in how we serve and how we practice, and you know, some of us may not prefer, you know, being so outspoken about humanism or atheism, particularly in Singapore. So there are certain balances that we try to achieve, and you spoke about earlier as well, when you talk about, you know, human beings having the capacity to reason and to evaluate evidence. So we try to take into account, you know, we try to use reason to weigh. To me, using reason doesn't mean neglecting, you know, sentiment and feelings, right? These are, you know, important human elements as I spoke about. Also taking into account, you know, religious identity. So we use reason, and we try to find the best way forward. We try to use models of decision making that have been crafted by better minds out there. So we look at, you know, like consensus decision making, for example, and we try to find a way forward for the Humanist Society to progress in Singapore.
Let me just add some flesh to the effective altruism philosophy, because this is principally like, I mean, maybe you can't say that Peter Singer spearheaded it, but he kind of prompted it, right? He initiated it because he had this provocative, you know, thought-provoking essay, Famine, Affluence, and Poverty, I think that's the title. But in any case, the thought experiment is that you see a drowning child and you're in nice clothes, right? So the idea about altruism is that you should jump into the pond to save the drowning child, you know, forsaking your nice clothes, right? So if you didn't do that, that's quite morally corrupt and bad of you. So he uses that line of thought to then extend to, you know, the money that we have, right? What is stopping us from people in rich countries from helping poor people in poor countries? And the idea is that if you earn, in your case, just a simple example, $100, right? Couldn't you spare at least $1 or $10, right, to help that poor child? Because it's the same moral issue as the drowning child experiment, right? So that's the, like, I think that's the spirit of effective altruism. And I mean, we don't have to get deep into it, but definitely some of the tougher areas to work out in effective altruism is what kind of causes then are considered worthy, because it does apply a very core, in some sense, utilitarian calculus to, oh, okay, only this problem we should put money into because we see some kind of outcome of it. But if it's another problem that you don't see money as, you know, being useful, then you sort of ignore it, which isn't, you know, one of the ways, which isn't a very good way, right, to kind of frame problems. Because and some problems you can't solve with money alone. So that's another issue.
But that's also an interesting perspective, right? So like you mentioned, some problems are easy to measure in KPIs. Yeah. Right. If you just throw money at it, you know, would it just disappear? Then what about problems that you can't just throw money at? How do you measure those problems? So these are questions that we also look at within the human the society, right? We see problems that are important, but maybe we can throw all the money we have, all the resources we have, and we still can't solve it, right? Alone. Is that still a problem worth throwing funds at? So this is a question that we ask ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about climate crisis on our channel, and we definitely don't talk about throwing money at the problem. Yeah, so yeah. You want to ask something first before I?
Yeah, no. I mean, the reason why I was asking how you resolve conflicts is because I imagine or assume that you would generally say, yeah, we try and reason through them. And you know, lately I've begun just questioning this whole idea of reason. Do we even understand it? And what is it, right? So like, you know, there's one view that says reason is just a method of where if you have certain assumptions or premises, you know, it's a way to arrive at certain conclusions. But then the problem is that we all start off with different premises, right, or different assumptions. And if you have very different assumptions, like, you know, how do you actually come to agreement about that? Yep. So yeah, I'm just curious whether, you know, there's this sort of question of what reason is. Does everyone have the same concept of reason?
I think I use reason as the verb, and it's basically means talking it out, right? It was quite interesting because that you just reminded me of this time when I was at an interfaith conversation. I think I was invited to talk about or share to a group of people about what humanism and what atheism means. After the sharing session, you know, there was a bit of a socializing, right, networking, and this was, you know, pre-COVID days, so we could eat at buffets and with our masks off, and this person came up to me, and he was like, oh, hey, I'm a father of 2 daughters. I follow this particular faith, and he asked me the exact same question that you did. You know, if you don't have faith, how do you you know, solve problems, solve conflicts? How do I get my daughters to listen to me, to what I say, you know, if I don't use faith? and yeah, I
would love to talk to him.
I had so many questions about, like, you know, I'm not a parent myself, so I can't, you know, possibly, you know, fathom the kind of like responsibilities, you know, he would have to he would have been shouldering. But in my head, I was like, have you tried, you know, talking to them about it? Have you tried to understand, you know, where they're coming from? Have you tried to help them understand where they're coming from? And I think this is something that, you know, I too have tried, or I'm still working on it to learn about my parents as well. And that is to try and think, you know, where they're coming from, right? When they ask for something or when they do something. I try not to just assume that, oh, you know, they're being lazy or that. Right? I think it's sometimes we default to our assumptions quite readily because it's a simpler way of thinking of life. But again, when we want to solve conflicts, and I think we do need to be a bit more deliberate about how we communicate. And it's not just about speaking, but also trying to listen and understand the other party. Trying to understand the other party and also try to help the other party understand us. So yeah, so that all ties back to your initial question, right? How do you reason? And I don't think that there's any any guidebook to it. Again, because earlier we talked about conflicts, right? Part of it is also because different people have different communication styles. Some people prefer to be, you know, more frank, more direct. You know, some people are a bit more hesitant, a bit more cautious. They try to avoid conflicts, and because of that, when some people try to avoid conflicts, you don't get to solve a particular problem, right? You just avoid it and you push it down the calendar. So yeah, reasoning, communicating is all about working and understanding how different people react to problems, to statements. Yeah.
I actually would be interested to hear how you would respond to that example. You know, if the parent comes up to you as another parent, right, says you can't use faith, right, to talk to you know, I almost feel like it's bad of me to kind of rephrase it, but it almost sounds like he's talking about what other means do I have to indoctrinate my child. but here's the thing, right? Because I think your example actually goes back to why I asked that question earlier about a negative stereotype about atheism, secularism, or you know, if you want to put humanism into it as well. But the idea is that, like, it seems that to many people, right, if you don't have some kind of faith, you just don't have a moral system, and I think that is a very negative stereotype. Yeah. So anyway, I'm just curious how you would try to answer the question as well, because you are a parent, and
well,
you know.
first of all, I think parenting is like the hardest complex problem that is out there, and there's no like formula. But yeah, I mean, I think it's also depending on the age of the child. Like my children are still pretty young, 3 and 5 years old, so it's a struggle to try and reason with a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
But as they get older, I'm definitely having more success getting them to do things by thinking through it, and also just if I say things in terms of not like I want you to do this, but like, oh, I would really love some peace right now. Do you think you could give me some peace? Like when you speak in terms of like your needs, they can actually be quite empathetic and be like, oh, okay, I'll keep quiet for now, right? Whereas the minute you tell a child like don't do something, the only word they hear is don't, and they want to push back, right? So it's just trial and error, and you actually find that there's some techniques that work, and I'm always in favor of less coercion. So that's my own sort of experiment over time. Like, can I do this with even less coercion than I did the last time? But I was curious whether you have ever had the experience of really firmly believing in something, and then someone else reasoning with you to the point where you changed your belief. Because I find a lot of times we actually have really strong convictions, and we're using reason to justify already held beliefs in hindsight.
I think I had a conversation the other day. I can't remember the exact topic, but it wasn't. I don't think it was anything like philosophical. It was probably something like as superficial as like what's the best egg dish or something, right? But
that's a safe topic to go into.
I can't quite remember, but I remember I had that kind of like epiphany, and like, oh yeah, like I realized that, oh hey, I didn't consider that. I mean, it was as superficial as like food or drink, but but it was quite interesting because the moment I had the epiphany, I immediately related it to my work in the Humanist Society. I'm like, oh yeah, right. Is this what it's like to talk to someone or to convince someone, about what's right or what's wrong? Related to that, a lot of what we do is not so much about, or rather we try not to go out to people or even engage with people who want to tell us what's right or what's wrong. What we try to do, and is perhaps quite closely related to your parenting style, is this technique that's called street epistemology. So what that essentially does is that to me at least, it takes epistemology, which is I think the study of knowledge, and it makes it accessible at a street or a lay person level. And what that means is that instead of thinking about the body of knowledge, what street epistemology tries to do is to get people to think about why they believe in or why they believe in what they believe. And the idea is that if more people can think about why they believe in what they believe, the world would be a slightly better place.
I mean, you're saying it can spur change, right? Like it can change.
I've actually seen those videos. Yeah, there's a lot of YouTube videos, and they're very watchable. I mean, like and it it's like a guy just sets up a chair and a table on the street, and then just invites people to sit down, and then they'll have a certain belief, like a belief in God or whatever, and then he'll just ask them questions, and they may start out with like 100% certainty, and by the end of it, they may say, oh, maybe I'm like 60% certain now, right? So it has been able to shift, and I've actually been wondering whether that's doable here in Singapore. Like, I would imagine the regulations make it very difficult, but it's something I would love to do as an experiment.
We've had some within the Humanist Society. We've had some small projects where where members, volunteers come together, and we just have that kind of like sessions, and we just talk about topics using that style of street epistemology. The interesting training is, and I say training is because it's something that we're not as humans we're not quite used to. Is that in order to be a good practitioner of street epistemology, you must be as willing to be changed as you are to quote unquote change other people. So you must also be willing to have your own beliefs and assumptions interrogated, right? And I think that it's only when you are at that level of comfort with yourself that people will resonate with you and start to talk to you. Right? If you talk to someone and they are just close-minded and they're only trying to get you to change your mind, you're not going to respond to that. Right? You're going to be way more defensive. And I think that is the interesting challenge about street epistemology is that like we do it because part of us also we want to be comfortable, not so much confident in our assumptions, but we also want to interrogate them, and that's just good training to constantly look at why we believe what we believe.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I'm going to come in a little bit strange in this conversation, because so what I'm being reminded of is that I myself have subjected myself, right, to talking to religious folks, and I have friends obviously who are religious, and I've even engaged in a very long form discussion with a friend who's a very fervent Christian, a very evangelical one, not one in Singapore anyway, but someone overseas. And going back to what both of you are talking about, I mean, another way I would prefer to call this street epistemology is basically the Socratic method, right? You keep interrogating, questioning your assumptions, and you see where you end up.
Yep.
And going to, let's say, what you brought up, let's say if you as an organization, your members conduct such a session, then you as humanists must be willing to accept that you could be wrong about God, and right, and all that. So I mean, I went as far as I could in terms of my intelligence, my emotional level, tolerance, right, with this friend of mine, and we're good. We both understand where we're coming from. We tried with each other to change our beliefs as strongly as possible. And I think that one way of going back to the notion of reason, one failure of reason is that you just can't convince people through words alone and arguments alone. Like, feelings do matter a lot. Yeah. So for a faith believer, there is something sensationally that they are feeling about the world, right? And I like the words of this religious scholar, Reza Arslan, right? When he's asked what religion is, he says basically it's the language of a post-materialist world. If you believe in a post-materialist world, then religion is that language for you. And just like how there are different sorts of languages, English, Malay, Japanese, whatever, right? You can find a language that speaks to you. And I think that's pretty cool, because Reza Arslan also accepts that to some people, like say someone like me, I don't believe in a post-materialist world, and so I don't have to be I don't have to feel the same kind of discomfort that perhaps a faith believer does have. And so that's what I mean by my kind of like my lessons with stretching the limits of the Socratic method or interrogating my beliefs. I still find myself pretty convicted about certain things, because it's my internal experience that I don't feel God, I don't feel this, I don't feel that, and as much as you share with whatever your faith believes in, it just doesn't resonate at all. And so much of it is also based on where the person is brought up in, right? So if you're brought up in a particular family, culture, then all the more you're going to feel it, because you were brought up in it. It's very difficult if you weren't brought up in it, and you have a different set of conditions or circumstances.
Yeah,
so,
one of the limitations of reasoning is your very fundamental axioms and assumptions about what are definitions and what counts as evidence, right? If you roll 2 6s in a row, you may say, oh, that is evidence of divine intervention, but to someone else they may be like, no, that's just like chance. How do you define this divine intervention? Is an old text evidence? So these are things that I think I personally have had quite a few conversations, similar conversations before, and after a while I stopped having these conversations because I know that at the end of the day it boils down to evidence. Like what I see as evidence, what they see as evidence. Like we fundamentally disagree on what the evidence is, and if we cannot reconcile that, then there's no point having that kind of conversation. And perhaps that's also why we take a very pragmatic form of humanism that doesn't try to reconcile that difference, but as you said, just really provide that space where everyone can come together, and like we know that there are fundamental differences that we cannot reconcile, but that's okay. At the end of the day, we all share very human problems that we can solve together.
So I think a way I would put it from our discussion is that we may not use reason to convert other people, to mold them or change them to the way we want them to change, but we can definitely build some kind of consensus, some kind of like not boundaries, some kind of common agreement, right? Because despite our differences, there are still some things we should be able to agree on.
Yeah, like a baseline level of like agreement, or what we can agree on, and
like a social compact.
Build from there. Yeah, exactly.
So actually that brings up my next question, right? Because I think it's something we do have to talk about, which is the changing demographics of Singapore, right? And even though we started this session talking about non-religious minority, but if you look deeply into the data, right, what we find is that actually from 2020, right, the census shows that the non-religious are actually the second largest group in Singapore, and that's after the Buddhists at 31%, the non-religious are 20%, and the Christians are 18.9%. And researchers in IPS, which is a think tank here, they expect the number to increase. And what I want to ask you is that, do you think there's going to be like fault lines, right, tension points that can come about because of this growing segment of non-religious people? Yeah. And I'm sure maybe there's something maybe your organization talks about.
It is interesting because
I can bring up an example. If
yeah,
you want.
please.
So a good example to me is the issue of homosexuality, right?
Yes.
So I can see that at least on your website, right? You guys have very open support for, say, Pink Dot, right? And just very recently in the news, there was this discussion about what to do with 377A law, right? It's the law that criminalizes consensual homosexual sex between men. And our government has sort of tried to find this in between line of support of like, okay, we're not going to proactively enforce the law, but at the same time we still want to keep it in the books because they believe that it's a way to sort of pander to the needs of the conservative majority, right? So I mean, what I'm saying here is that if I foresee, right, as an example, that as the non-religious community grows, I mean, do we still need to keep such laws in place? Because maybe they become a majority, maybe they actually start to be more vocal in saying that we don't believe in this kind of laws because they don't serve our values, right?
It is quite, so when we talk about values, it is quite, I've used the word interesting quite a bit in this session, but it is quite interesting because just as we spoke to Imran before, you understand that practitioners of Islam span the entire spectrum, right? So you have your more progressive individuals in you, but you also have your more conservative individuals. I think the same is true for humanism, or particularly atheism, right? Excuse me. It is not monolithic. Although the Humanist Society and the humanist movement in general is quite progressive.
Maybe liberal would be a better word for it.
Liberal, yeah. I'm sure that there are atheists who are also who may be conservative. Maybe atheists who lean on various angles on the social-political economic spectrum, right? So it's hard to say what will happen, right? Will this growing number of non-religious individuals lean liberal? Will they lean conservative? Hard to say. I mean, I do think that progressive ideals are good for humans to thrive regardless of their identity or their backgrounds. But that's what I personally believe in. That is what the Humanist Society generally also subscribes to. But yeah, it can be quite hard to predict what will happen.
To nitpick a little bit there, right? I mean, if a tenet of humanists believe, right, is say common humanity, for example, right, then you have to believe in some form of equal rights, regardless of say sexual orientation, right? So if someone's a conservative humanist, that sounds like an oxymoron, because you can't, in principle, be an individual that you want to call yourself a humanist, but you don't believe in that very concept of equality of rights, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So.
Yeah, I think we are all on agreement of that, right? Yeah. So again, the tricky part about using, and I'm going to sound quite millennial when I say that I don't like to use labels, but when we look at you know, conservative as a term, you know, you can be conservative on, and I think Singapore is quite unique in this area as well, right? You can be conservative on social-political arenas, but you can be, you know, perhaps favoring corporates and capitalism in economic policies, right? So you can lean or slant different on various spectrums. Again, I can't speak for all non-religious, but yeah, in the human society, we are quite progressive, and you know, when we look at the LGBT issues, for example, that's something that we've spoken about. That's something that we've tried to work with, you know, our partners, at, you know, our friends at Uga Chaviga, at Aware to help to solve. But at the same time, we understand that it's a slightly more thorny issue than because of the nature of Singapore. I'm also quite cognizant that, you know, while we are having this discussion, this very academic, intellectual discussion about this, people out there who are facing these problems on a day-to-day basis, and to them it's not so academic, it's very real. So it can be quite tricky to solve. Yeah, and it definitely takes some I think socio-political capital.
Yeah, I appreciate you actually bring up the fact that you know, whether a person is for LGBT rights or against doesn't neatly fall on the secular religious divide. That was the same point that Imran made actually when he was on here. And one thing I've learned is that people are very surprising. You know, like you can never know what cluster of beliefs kind of come together in a person. I mean, you know, I've good friends who I was just very surprised that they would be Trump supporters. You know, like based on everything else I knew about them, I wouldn't have predicted that, but it turned out that way.
Yeah, I mean, and that's also why I you know, when we have these discussions, and maybe we'll get into it later during interfaith scenes as well. I try not to use labels. I try not to say, oh, okay, you are a Christian, therefore I assume that you believe in these tenets, right? But okay, you may be a member of the Christian faith or community. What do you believe in? Right? Why do you believe in what you believe in? Right? I want to understand your belief and not your organization's beliefs, because sometimes they can be very different things. And I think that is a bit of the challenge, right? That this method of problem solving isn't exactly scalable. You can't exactly scale this to a large, you know, organization like religious council, because different people have different beliefs, right? So how do you convince this council that, you know, to take a step in a different direction, for example? Yeah.
But that being said, like and I do want to get into this now, which is, you know, you've been a participant in this interfaith dialogues, right? So I want to have a sense of like what are very common issues of this agreement that you guys have to work out. Because yes, you know, I agree with both of you that, you know, every individual comes with a unique set of values. They don't necessarily have to belong to one particular camp or the other. And certainly a person could be have different set of values for, say, the economic sphere versus the social sphere versus the political sphere, right? People can have all this kind of very complex line of thought. But you know, but when you go to interfaith dialogue, right, you represent something, the other person represents something, and that concept has a certain common set of beliefs, right, and set of values that they want to see enacted in society. And that's the important line of, you know, that's why you have interfaith dialogues, because otherwise you assume everyone agrees on the same thing, but they don't, right? And that's why you need the dialogue. So can you just share with us, you know, what are very maybe contentious or vexing or long-standing issues that you guys have to work out?
One of the, and this is a bit more meta, one of the big challenges of interfaith dialogues is that, that most of the people who attend interfaith dialogues are really of a certain already lean a certain
type.
Yeah, so usually a bit more liberal or a bit more progressive, right? So they understand that while they may subscribe to a certain faith or they may be of a certain community, they accept or they want to understand the existence of other people. Of course, the pockets of people that we don't get to are the people who don't want to attend such dialogues at all.
So basically, you're saying it's self-selection bias.
Yeah. So that's something. So that is a very real challenge that we are trying to solve, right? So when we meet at interfaith dialogues, usually everyone's in agreement because generally we know one another. There's some rapport that's been established. But we constantly want to challenge ourselves and say, okay, how can we reach out to people who maybe don't subscribe to this philosophy, right? In the past, we have had members of the Humanist Society come to us and say, hey, we are atheists. Why are we doing interfaith work? Right? Why are we trying to be part of them? So they see oh, why is the society trying to join their club, right? They're what they're doing is wrong. It's fiction. Why do we pander to them? Yeah. So there's still quite a bit of work when it comes to building the interfaith scene, and I think it's still quite young, and with all the notwithstanding all the work that's been done before, I think we still need to do quite a bit more. Yeah.
Let me ask something. What do you expect to see as the outcome? What's the end goal from all this interfaith work? I mean, because from my sense of it is that, from what you're saying, just I mean, maybe I'm butchering it a little bit too much, right? But you're really speaking as if like the people who attend such talks are really the more liberal-minded of that particular sect, of that particular community, right? So if you imagine a whole cohort of, say, example, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, right? It's only the more liberal ones that are coming for the interfaith talk. So you still have a lot of work, right? Because the other ones are still not attending, maybe not even eager participants, right? So what's the end goal here?
I mean, I think the end goal is for 100% of Singaporeans or people in Singapore to accept and understand everyone else, right? So right now we say we have maybe let's give arbitrary number like 10% of the more liberal population of every faith that attends interfaith, right? Or accepts the existence of everyone else, right? We want to bring it to everyone and have even the most conservative or the most traditionalist members understand that and accept that hey, other faiths exist. And this is the sort of environment that we have to coexist in together.
Man, I got a funny joke here. If we were living in America, you'd be accused of having a liberal agenda. Okay, anyway.
It is. Yeah, again, it is quite challenging, right? Because to some people, you may see hey, that's quite a very normal way of looking at society, right? Like if you all live in the same house, it makes sense that everyone gets along. Right. Yeah. That everyone knows. Oh, hey, this person has this morning routine. This person likes to sleep late. Like, and you accept that, and you can live together like that, right? But when you try to extrapolate that this roommate situation to the whole country, it becomes a bit more challenging. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know how this connects to what we've been talking about, but I feel moved to share like that. I find myself in quite an interesting place right now because I would say for most of my life, and as you know, I studied philosophy and I've really subscribed to the values of like humanism and enlightenment and rationality. But lately I've been really drawn to, let's say, indigenous perspectives and wisdom, and really just seeing the world through a very different lens. So, whereas the Enlightenment was all about like a single story of progress, right? From maybe primitive beliefs to very modern beliefs, from compost toilets to flush toilets. There's this single line of progress. I find myself wanting to go in the other direction now, right? Like and explore, let's say, the virtues of compost toilets. And so instead of humanism, I'm drawn to humus, you know, the soil, like stuff that's earthy and filled with organic matter. And rather than thinking that, you know, what I prize about myself is just this pure rationality, but, you know, embracing just all the messy emotional aspects of myself. And so recently I was asking my daughter this question: where do you think thoughts come from? And she's 5 years old, and she immediately, without a beat, said, from the brain. You know, like maybe she learned that in school. And there was part of me that actually felt saddened that at such a young age, she was already taught, you know, just this very, like, I don't know, I mean, you know,
dualist, dualist model of the mind?
Or materialist model, like thoughts just come from the mind.
Right.
And whereas, like, if I ask my 3-year-old, you know, she's much more open to, like, oh, maybe my thoughts are what the wind and the trees whisper to me, or the thoughts bubble up from the ground through my feet. You know, my feet, you know, hear the thoughts through the ground. And yeah, I don't know. There's a part of me that feels maybe we've lost something through education. So yeah, I'm just wondering how you feel hearing me talk about this.
Can I repackage that as well?
Sure.
Because I think there's a way to kind of have you address this. So I think you know, one of the key controversial figures, right, and the atheist movement is Richard Dawkins, right? And Richard Dawkins is very straight-laced, like, you know, let's practice rational thinking as much as possible. Let's dispel you know, all fallacious reasoning and beliefs, right? And I do want to bring up a little bit to talk about, you know, tension points and stuff like that. But, you know, he was asked a very similar question, like kind of similar to what you're talking about, which is he was asked, okay, does that mean I should stop teaching my child about Santa Claus? Should I, you know, not bring up my child in you know, to engage in imaginative thought, to think about magic and stuff like that, right? Are you saying to take all that out? And he said, no, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, human beings should not be deprived of, like, imaginative play or being able to explore other realms or other dimensions of human existence. But it's just that when it comes to maybe very fundamental issues, so just picking one out of the head, like, you know, let's say you talk about toilets, right? So maybe if you look at it as a broader issue about hygiene, right? I mean, we can look at hygiene in many different lenses, and surely science has to be at least one of it, right? But it doesn't mean that, for example, you can't formation in the jungle, and, you know, you can even look at it from the way that you've been talking about, like an indigenous lens, that there are other important benefits to, you know, being out in the wilderness that maybe modern science can't explain, but, you know, there's a kind of way of making it still meaningful and intelligible, right? And meaningful to us to still explore. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. Okay, now it's your turn. Sorry, you had a guess here.
No.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, when I was younger, I was always very fascinated by neuroscience, right? And one of the questions that, you know, I kept asking myself was, yeah, exactly where the thoughts come from, right? We know that, you know, we have a whole, you know, network of you know, cells in our brain, but what is it about, you know, these cells, you know, sending, you know, calcium signals, electrical signals that would cause thoughts to emerge, right? Like how does that occur? Like when you think of an elephant, you're visualizing an elephant, but where does that visual image come from? How does it come from electrical signals? I was always quite fascinated by that. Still am. So yeah, but I think when I would look at it is that everything that we've described, right, are models of thought, right? And models being models can be useful or not useful, right? Sometimes they are right or wrong, not usually, but they're either useful for a particular situation or they're not. And I think it makes sense as you know, rational humans, that we use whatever model makes sense to the situation that we're in. If, you know, you feel that you want to connect with you know, maybe a sense of spirituality with maybe spiritual nature, perhaps then scientific language don't have the best words for you to use, right? You spoke about language earlier. So then it makes sense perhaps to use other different philosophies. And then again, if you're going to drive a car, it makes sense to switch to a different language or different philosophy, and operate using that to navigate around the roads, right? And you don't have to just rely on one text. You can look at all the texts, and when you look at you talk about the role of storytelling and fiction, and if you want to tell a story, maybe reading from a scientific journal isn't the best way to do it, right? Where would we be without fiction, without Harry Potter? Some of the best movies out there today are based on, most of them are based on some fiction or have a little fiction woven to them, right? So these are all, I think, critical elements of being human, like art, storytelling, imagining a different world, and it makes sense to use different tools to solve the different problems that you have.
So let me then now turn the question to you. So I think Unsu basically kind of espoused like a certain kind of spirituality for him. Does spirituality mean anything to you, or how have you tried to wrestle with this question?
I don't think I've always seen myself as a very spiritual person. But I do sort of resonate with what he spoke about, right? When I don't have a compost toilet, but I something have sometimes look at farm to table concepts. I work with food quite a bit, so that's something that I've been paying more attention to. It's not so much. Some people may see it as a spiritual process of growing your own food from the soil, harvesting it, vis-a-vis going to the supermarket, buying it off the shelf. Some people may see it as spiritual. I don't see it as spiritual, to use the words. I see it as a more deliberate, more conscious approach to thinking about food, looking at food, and I think in the world today we could be more deliberate. We could be more conscious about our choices. You spoke about climate change earlier, and of course deliberate, conscious choices on the part of the individual are important to solving some of these problems as well. So yeah, not quite spiritual, but I see where you're coming from.
Actually, since you mentioned your work in the lab with growing meat, I would love to hear more about it. And also, you mentioned earlier, like, you've always been interested in neuroscience. I'm just picturing you working in a lab, and Descartes had his famous thought experiment of brains and
brain
vat.
and vat,
So
yeah.
do you ever imagine you could actually, the meat that you're working with could actually have thoughts?
So it is the puzzle of cultivated meat is a huge one. My work is just a very small corner of it. So we look at if you look at cultivated meat in the world today, a lot of them.
So I missed that word. What meat?
Cultivated.
Cultivated meat.
Cultivated.
Okay.
Some people use the words lab grown, but it's a bit of a misnomer. So
can you explain why it's a misnomer?
Yeah, sure. So when we think of lab grown meat, we think of cells or lump of cells in a petri dish or in a test tube, and then the lump of cells gets put in the oven, it's baked, and then you eat it. Commercially, that's not quite how it's done. You would grow the cells in a tank that is not unlike a beer tank, like a fermentation tank. So the cells would grow there. You would harvest it, and then you would need to process it. Maybe mix it with some fibers to give it a bit more texture. Mix it with some nutrients to enrich it, and then you can cook it and eat it as a meat product. So the challenge is from where we are today to be able to get to a state where we can eat or we can enjoy cultivated meat at affordable or accessible price. It's a lot of work, and one of the problems with cultivated meat today is that one of the technical challenges rather is that we still rely on fetal bovine sebum. So that's sebum from cows.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we have to slaughter the cows, harvest the sebum, because this sebum contains what we call growth factors or essentially nutrients for the young calf to grow. These are also the same nutrients that we can use to grow cells in a beer tank effectively, right? But of course, slaughtering cows doesn't solve the problem of creating ethical meat, right, or slaughter-free meat. So we try to find ways, other ways of manufacturing these growth factors, these nutrients, without having to slaughter any living thing. Yeah, well, okay, we use microbes, bacteria, yeast, fungi to do this.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not caught up with the science of this, but I guess for a layperson like myself, we are interested in a world where I'm interested in a world where I do want animals to not live in horrendous conditions. I still am a meat eater. I think I'll always be a meat eater. Maybe there's something vegans need to work very hard on converting me out of. But in any case, the idea is that I do want to see a better world for animals. So just speculatively speaking, right? Do you think there is going to be a future where most of our meat source is going to come from cultivated meat, or do you think this is still there's too much to overcome, mass production and shipping into countries around the world, stuff like that, price point?
I am cautiously optimistic.
Right.
Again, we spoke about models and problem solving earlier. I don't think that this is a one-size-fits-all problem. Cultivated meat as a solution to a problem makes sense within certain constraints, right? So if you define a certain system, that way you may find that cultivated meat is an ideal solution. In areas where you have vast arable land for livestock, where you have subsistence farming. So we mentioned indigenous farming practices earlier, right? Were those unsustainable? No, they weren't, right? The problem comes with industrialization and scale, right? So there's nothing wrong inherently. There's nothing inherently wrong or unsustainable about subsistence farming, right? If you're just farming to feed yourself, your family, your community. But where the problem arises is when you start to move to factory farming. That's when you start to push more animals in smaller spaces. You get more diseases that way. You get more emissions to an economist or to an entrepreneur that may be more resource efficient. But you have to pick and choose your battles along the way. Yeah, you can't win everything. So cultivated meat does have its own resources, resource intensity.
Right, yeah.
So these are problems that an urban solution, an urban system may look for, but another area may not look at cultivated meat as a solution. So yeah.
Okay, so I we kind of have to let you go soon. So I just want to have some really last kind of questions to go through. So actually, maybe let's talk about something that we're talking about animals and all that. Maybe I can relate this to one of the things that your organization does, which is to have public workshops on Darwinism, right? And so I think as compared to America, we don't have a vocal segment of the population demanding that Darwinism be stricken away from our public education. So we are taught the theory of evolution, right? Okay, so feel free to correct me on that, right? Okay,
no,
but anyway, my question basically is that, right? Humanists, let's put it that way, right? You guys, hold a very high regard for Darwin's ideas, right? And you've even had this public, this event where you had your members take a trail where apparently Darwin, or was it another co-traveller?
I think it was probably Wallace.
Wallace, right? Sorry, Wallace, right? Was visited Singapore some way in the past, right? In the history. Then I want to present the counterpoint from some religious zealots that maybe the way humanists look at Darwinism is like a form of religion. So what I want to ask you is, why is Darwin so important to teach, right? And what do you make of what I just said about that counterpoint, right? Like, are we treating his work too much like a religion?
I will try and share a quick personal anecdote.
Yeah.
So when I was in junior college, we did A-level biology, and part of the syllabus for A-level biology was evolution by natural selection. And of course, there's built a lot on Charles Darwin's work, but also Mendel's work in genetics. And for the longest time, I sort of assumed that as students we would accept what our teachers teach to us, and that there can't be any contention within like A-level syllabus, right? Like it has to be quite sanitized and such. But what was quite curious was when the lecturer on the first day of the topic, her first words were that this is part of the syllabus, that everything that students present are scientific fact, and that these are almost undisputed, right? And that was quite curious because I realized that no other lecturer for any other topic they talked before about like cells had to put that disclaimer up front on day one of the lecture. I thought it was quite curious, but I sort of like dismissed it. It was only after a few days that I learned that one of my classmates didn't believe in whatever the teacher was talking about. That she had her own, again, counter evidence that what the lecturer was presenting was not true or was disputed within the scientific community. It's not right, and yeah. So you say that, yeah. I mean, we say that evolution by natural selection is being taught in schools, but we have had pastors of local churches come up and say that it's untrue. We've had students who go through it without understanding it, or go through it just because it's part of the syllabus. But I don't like to say believe in a fact, but they don't subscribe to it. So it is quite a curious cognitive dissonance, if you will.
Right.
Yeah. I think I personally don't think about Darwin or Darwinism all that much. I think it was or is still today described as a landmark or paradigm shift. It was because of the historical context in which the Origin of Species was published back then. Today, if you take it as fact, if you take gravity as fact, you don't think about gravity all that much. You just work with it, right? It's just a description of nature and the world around. And I personally can enjoy natural beauty by understanding how things came to be, how they evolved by natural selection, and looking at convergent or divergent evolution. You look at like marsupials versus like mammals. But I don't think humanists in general pay a lot of attention or pays more attention to Darwin and Darwinism than the usual person.
Right.
We do. There is an International Darwin Day, and that's to sort of commemorate Charles Darwin and his work. I think that's late February. So every Darwin Day we try to organize a trail or like a museum exhibition or museum tour, just to have our members appreciate nature a bit more. Not so much about Darwin and natural selection, because again we take it as as fact, right? But to appreciate nature, to appreciate the beauty of nature, and to appreciate how evolution by natural selection falls within nature. Yeah. Okay. Your second question was about religion. So yeah, again, it's not so much a religion to me, in that it is a statement on reality, right? That living things have evolved by natural selection. There exist neutral mutations. There exist bottlenecks, genetic bottlenecks, and it's not so much a religion as that that it cannot be disputed. Right? If you have evidence, feel free to dispute it. The reality is that people have tried and they've fallen short. And on the other hand, there's been a mountain of evidence from fossil records, from microevolution, to demonstrate that evolution by natural selection is true.
Yeah. Okay. I saw your anecdotal story, one anecdotal story from me. So I mean, actually, you bring up that example exactly pinpoints what I was alluding to earlier, which is I think that this kind of conservative, religious conservative, individuals, right, within our system, right, they have a certain power, right, to influence education. Yeah. One thing that I can point to is sexually based, our sexuality education in Singapore, right, is very influenced by conservative ideas, right, and so that's why I mentioned the whole idea that if the non-religious community, right, stood up a little bit more to say that, hey, we don't agree with this form of education, right, we don't agree that what you teach in science is immediately rebutted later by a religious pastor. He can teach anything else, it's within his curriculum, but he shouldn't have a say, right, in terms of what the science teacher is talking about. So this is what I mean. I think these are certain things that we do have to talk about as a society. So that's one thing. Anyway,
we definitely have to.
Then on a more funnier way of talking about this topic, so I have a very religious, conservative, well, let's not put the conservative part there, Christian friend, and he met another Christian friend of mine, and they had a discussion, about their religion. Obviously, they share a lot of common values. And then eventually, one of them says, something along the lines of like, the Earth is only 6,000 years old. And then my other Christian friend says, like, where do you think dinosaur bones come from? So I mean, like, I think these discussions, right? I mean, they may seem quite abstract, theoretical, like it's not really going to matter to your day-to-day living. But and I also came to this point where I realized that, look, I'm not an expert in evolution either, right? But I can read all the books on it and I can come to a better understanding. But I would never, all of us human beings will never have a full comprehension about how living things evolve, right? It's just way too complex, right? We only come closer and closer to understanding it, but we never really know the exact truth. So it's not really our duty to really know for sure, but it's just a good way of kind of appreciating nature, appreciating our existence on Earth, how precious and how contingent it is, right? And I think that's kind of like what's important about evolution, right? That's what you can kind of understand from learning it. So anyway, just to basically wrap it up, like I do think that like there is something to be said about the value of having science taught as a discipline and not having it muddied, right, by other doctrines, right? I mean, there needs to be a healthy space of respect, of like boundaries, if I can put it that way. Okay, anyway.
I could geek out for hours on science. We're at time, and so I just want to appreciate, your coming here, and I've enjoyed the conversation. I think you're a model of many of the values of humanism. You come across as open-minded, curious, there's a rational rigor to this conversation. I think when you talked about the street epistemology and really making sure that you're starting from a point of view of you are prepared to have your own mind changed, I would say that is a form of spirituality. I mean, that is a spiritual practice. I think that is, as important as any out there. So anyway, I just have a small question. You seem like someone who would have good book recommendations. So if you could recommend one book that has interested you or blown you away, what would that be?
I'm trying to recall the title. I think that is
The God Delusion. No, just kidding.
What's that? It's AC grading.
AC
AC
grading,
grading,
right,
okay.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, is it a recent book?
I think was it the Good Book or something? I can't remember.
Oh, all right. Okay, actually, I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm
It's,
talking about, right.
I think I have it on my Kindle. But yeah, it's a book where he tries to write it like it's a Bible, right? It's called The Good Book, and it's
Oh no,
supposed to be
it's I think it's a publication before that. I can't remember what
Okay.
it's called.
because I have here The Good Book, A Humanist Bible, AC Grading, and another one that I have here is called The Meaning of Things, Applying Philosophy to Life.
I
But
can't-
look, this guy
okay.
writes
Anyway,
a lot of books.
yeah,
But yeah.
I'll look it up.
Grading,
I will look it up. AC grading.
Yeah, he again we were quite lucky. He when I was in UCL, he dropped by one day to talk to us, and it was yeah, he basically just stood at the podium and spoke for like 2 hours, like, you know, non-stop. You know, just like a stream of consciousness. And I think he describes humanism and I think not just humanism but his approach to looking at life quite well. And one of his quotes that quite resonated with me, because, you know, I work with food, is that he says that humanism is about being a good guest at the dinner table of life.
Beautiful.
So, you know, it doesn't say about, you know, what you should do or how you should act or, you know, how you should vote, but you do what, you know, a good guest would do. And I think that sort of makes sense, right? You know, in a way, we are all very transient visitors or guests on this plane of existence, or this world, and we want to be good or be nice while we're here. So I think that sort of captures it quite well.
Yeah.
His other quote was to treat humans as you would a painting, and that is to give them the benefit of a good light. So you see people as you know, as good individuals first, and of course, you know, if flaws show for whatever reason, and that's when you appreciate the flaws, or you try to help resolve some of these issues. But yeah, that's his two quotes on you know, humanism, being human, and treating other humans.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'm just looking at what books he had: The Reason of Things, The God Argument, The Frontiers of
It
Knowledge.
might have been the God argument.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Okay. So I just want to end off by, you know, echoing what Unsu has described about you. Thanks for coming onto the show. Been a quite great exemplar, you know, about what a humanist should be like. And I do thank you a lot for doing that kind of needless work, thankless work maybe, you know, of talking to other faiths and trying to build a name for humanism, secularism, atheism, whatever, right? Because you are kind of a member of all these different subclasses. So yeah, and I just thought, you know, just to end it off, maybe you just want to say a few things for anyone who's watching this, who is interested in the Humanist Society Singapore, who's interested in your, you know, maybe they are also wandering humanists trying to find a place to belong. You know, do you want to do a little bit of a blurb just to advertise what you guys do, the various events you guys have, you know, where to find you guys?
Yeah, I think we are online. We are on Instagram, as you know, the young kids are these days. We have a website, humanist.org.sg. You know, feel free to check us out. We do organize, you know, socials, just casual, you know, hangouts. We don't all meet at pubs because we don't quite have a pub culture in Singapore. But we meet at cafes, or these days we just meet online. And we try to create a welcoming space for people to explore what humanism is, and as I described earlier, humanism can take many different forms. There's no right or wrong way to look at it, and I think it's important that, you know, we all get in touch with our values and you know, how we see the world, so much more than how we label ourselves, right? So we always welcome people to you know, talk to us, or even, you know, volunteer with us and come help chart the next decade of the Humanist Society.
Cool. Well, you're a human being. Please look him up and his organization. So with that said, thank you so much, Ding Jie, and, you know, thanks a lot for coming to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.